say one thing about the Texas grants. You know, they took a huge hit, and it's going to be coming in the next couple of years. But there was a lot of politicking going on behind the scenes, and we were quite influential. We do both. We have a full-time lobbyist hired at Bldg. We do both policy work and litigation, and many times, you know, they're mixed. But the advocacy that we had to do on Texas grants, because then they wanted to tie it to a lot of accountability issues and testing issues. So we had to push back so hard on it, and we were successful enough, but there's still a huge cut. So, you know, that's going to even push up the debt, and especially for the lowest income students. They even wanted to take out the poverty issue. There were some in the legislature who wanted to take out the poverty issue aligned with the Texas grants. So I just want to mention that because there might be more efforts to even worsen the Texas grants in the next session.
Any other comments?
The only thing I would say is you know, from third grade now, all the way up by the state system, we're putting kids on a ramp that's supposedly supposed to have them college ready. And David talked about that a little bit in his presentation. My question is, if we do that and we're successful at doing that, is college education going to be unaffordable for most people at that time? That's the real question. I talk to people and parents every day that talk about, you know, you need to get ready, you need to take these classes, you need to prepare yourself to go to college. You know, the academic side of it is not what they worry about. What do they worry about? They worry about paying for it. How am I going to pay for my son or my daughter to go to college?
I would like to invite our final speaker, Mr. Greene, up to discuss student loan debt issues.
So Tim kind of, he gave you a little bit of a perspective on how big of a problem student loan debt has become. Did you know that in 2010, it passed credit card debt is the largest segment of debt in our country? And this year it's expected to top $1 trillion. Think about that, $1 trillion, and it's mostly sitting on one generation who are at the beginning of their lives. All across the country, and especially fall and winter of this last year with people like the Occupy movement and student organizations all across the country are becoming more and more interested in this because they're realizing sooner than I think I did when I was in college, you're going to have to pay this money back. And they see their tuition increase, and so this is really becoming, just like public education in Texas, the cuts is kind of a rallying point. This is becoming a rallying point for a lot of college students across the country. And so, like Tim showed us, you see about 2/3 of 2010 graduates graduate with some kind of student loan debt. And in between 2001 and 2007, that debt rose 18%. And so the debt is rising and it's continuing to rise. And we see that the national average is about $25,000. Texas, if you go to school in Texas, you're doing a little better. You're going to come out with an average of about $20,000. And as we saw, Tim said, tuition has just about tripled since 1980. But then there's some hidden things that you don't hear about, and one of those is credit cards. And in 2008, a survey showed that 84% of undergraduates have credit cards, and the average debt was $3,000. So I think you can just go ahead and just add $3,000 to whatever they say their student loan debts are. 21% of those that had cards had a balance between $3,000 and $7,000. And so there's significant debt added on. I got my first credit card when I was in college, and the way they hooked me was they gave me a coupon for a free pizza at Papa John's. And you come and sign up for their card and you get a free pizza. I mean, they give away t-shirts. It's just terrible. The other one is, you don't hear about this much, but private loans, so not federal loans, but private loans for education are expanding at a huge pace. In the 2007-2008 school year, private lenders provided about $17 billion in in student loans, and that's a 592% increase from a decade ago. That's, it's ballooning. 23% of all loans that students take out are private. And the unfortunate part is the students who take out these private loans that are the most detrimental are low-income students and students attending private for-profit colleges. And so I wouldn't call federal loans a trap, but this is definitely a trap. It's much worse. And most of those students who take out private loans have not exhausted their access to federal loans. So what's the situation when they leave college? Tim showed us a little bit of the unemployment data, but I have it broken down here by degrees. And so if you got a liberal arts degree, the unemployment rate for you right now is about 9.4%. Education, 5.4%. I would say that's going to go up, especially if they're making more cuts. Architecture, this is the worst, 13.9%, and overall you can see it's 8.9%. And so just keep in mind that your debts may be 10, 15, 20,000, but our generation's debt has topped $1 trillion. If you look at graduate degrees, 55% of people seeking a master's degree had to borrow an average of $31,000. Doctorate of Education, 65% of people borrowed an average of $44,000. And this is where it gets crazy. If you're seeking a law degree, almost everybody has to borrow money, 89%, and you borrow $80,000. And medicine, a medical degree, 82%, $120,000, just about. And so, in the next election, you're going to hear that America is, the land of small business and small business opportunity. But how can we expect people our age to go out and start their own law firm or start their own medical practice when you have these kind of debts that almost force you into that, not taking the risk and finding the regular paycheck? Let's look at a graph of U.S. higher education enrollment. And you can see it goes from 1900 to present day, and we're looking at not even 1 million students in 1900, up over 16 million today. And we want to look at this graph and find out why does it look how it does. And you see the first part, 1900 and 1940. If you were enrolled in college, you were most likely you were white, upper class, and a man. And so college was an elite endeavor. But then things changed. You see, 1940, at the end of World War II, we had the GI Bill, and then after that, in the 60s, we had some more programs that really encouraged college enrollment. And so, what I want to stress here, we had the GI Bill, and that was the first upward trend, and then the National Defense Education Act was in response to Sputnik, and everybody freaked out the Russians are winning, so they sent everybody to school, and that was the right response, Civil rights and Title IX, all of this increases your access to education, and your access to education is your access to the middle class and to stay in the middle class. But Tim showed us some of this data. If you look at grants versus loans, you see the blue stripes are the grants and the purple is the loans in 1980. And it's similar back up to the GI Bill. But if you look at more recent, what happened to the grants? We've switched our priorities. And what's happened, I think, is it was really the GI Bill and sending people to college to get them into the middle class was really you could call it a late New Deal philosophy. Education was viewed as a collective investment in the individual and the country and in the economy. The higher educated our workforce is, the higher quality goods and the more production of higher quality goods will increase, and that lets us compete with countries like China, where we're not going to compete at the low end, we're going to compete at the high end. And so we kind of switched that to looking at education as an individual commodity. It's something to be bought and sold, and it's something to make money off of. And so in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen that tuition increases, the larger number of private loans, and I would go so far as to call them predatory loans. And then the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act of 2005. What this did was it made it almost impossible for you to go into bankruptcy for whatever reason and wipe out your student loan debt. Now these debts will follow you wherever you go and for the rest of your life. But there is some good news. In the last year Congress passed a student loan debt law, and Obama updated it, and he said if you pay 10% of your income for 20 years towards your debt, the federal government will forgive the rest of your debt. And actually just this last week, let's see what his name, Representative Hanson Clark of Michigan introduced the Student Loan Forgiveness Act of 2012. And he gives you a better deal, 10% of your income for 10 years, and the remainder will be forgiven. It caps the federal loans and interest rate at 3.4%. And if you were entering the public service after school, such as being a teacher, you'll pay 10% of your income for 5 years, and then the rest of your loans will be forgiven. The student loan forgiveness movement, though, is what I'm calling it. Different organizations at universities around the country call it different things. They're fighting for more. I mean, in politics, if you want some pie, you got to ask for the whole thing, and then you get part of it. And so SUSJ here, we are advocating for full student loan amnesty, some kind of forgiveness program, followed by it would have to be a radical reevaluation of how we're going to fund colleges and how we're going to enroll students. Our arguments, it's not about the individual. It's not about what grades you make, if you act like a fool when you're in college, you know. It's not about what field you're in, because universities are important. All the departments here are important. We're making an economic argument, and Representative Clark, in his bill, he expressly says this is an economic argument. It's a stimulus. Like Tim said, we're not going through the normal life cycle in the same rate in case the parents were. We're avoiding buying a house, the car, getting married, and having kids. If you were to give relief to people our age, my age, Tim's age, from our student loans, these are the things we're going to do. Whereas if you just give somebody, you know, $500 in an election year, they're just going to pay it towards a credit card or put it in a bank. If you give us the relief, we're going to be spending the money on those things that drive the economy. It's also a moral argument. Education, we believe education is a right and it's necessary in a healthy democracy. And in preparing for this, I talked to my family about this. I've been talking about it for a few months. And I had a family member say, well, you took out the loans and you have to pay it back. You know, that's just how it works. And I have a cousin, he just turned 17. He's going to go to college in a couple years. And are we really going to make him choose between not going to college and going to college but coming out with this $25,000 ball and chain? I don't even think that's a choice that we should be giving or forcing on these kids. I think we need to rethink what we're doing here and find a better way. And so the solutions, we really have to identify what's going on. Actually, before I go to solutions, you know, what do we want this graph to look like over the next 40 years? Do we want it to continue do we want enrollment to continue to rise, or do we want to see it peak right now and then go down? I think the others, or they, you know, that we were talking about earlier, they want to see that go back down. There are people, it's really an ideological attack on education. There are people that want to see colleges and universities return to that, you know, elitist kind of level. And I don't think that's right. Also, we have to realize the financial sector, the banks have targeted student loans as a place to make money. And so where they're going to make money, you know, they put their efforts into, and it's just going to get worse. And it's really, we hear this phrase, attack on the middle class. What does that mean? Well, this is what it means. It's denying access to education or impeding it. Impeding the access not only lets you, or prevents you from moving up into the middle class, but what is the status of people who came to college, took out all these loans? Are we going to be able to stay in the middle class, having to pay all this back? It's up in the air. And so one of the solutions that SUSJ promotes, and it's on the national level, is the Wall Street sales tax. Now, you all pay tax on everything that you did today, pretty much. I mean, the clothes you're wearing, if you went out to lunch, the gas in your car, the car itself, all the things that you do, you pay taxes on. But if we look around, who doesn't pay sales tax, and it's Wall Street. You see up here we have 3,000 trillion yearly in turnover. That's where they buy a stock, they sell a stock, and buy a new stock, right? They're turning their money over. And we think of Wall Street as the guys in the red jackets, you know, they got the paper, they're down on the floor, and they're trying to buy and sell stocks as an investment. And it's not that anymore, and it's something we have to realize. High-frequency trading, that's where they use computers, and they buy and sell millions of stocks within a minute or two. And it's not like they're buying them to hold them, and they hope the company does well, and you know, their investment returns a profit. They're buying them, they're waiting for a minute up to 30 minutes for a small percentage change in the price of the stock, and then they sell it. That's not investment, that's speculation. And if we're going to talk about debt in this country, you know, the national debt's a big issue. So we have almost $1 trillion in credit card debt. We have $1 trillion in student loan debt, 14.7 trillion in national debt. How much debt do the people that do this kind of speculation have? And I'm not going to get into like derivatives or anything like that, but if you take a realistic look at these banks that are doing the predatory lending on students and others, it's $1,500 trillion in debt. And that is one of the biggest secrets around today. You may have heard this before. It's Tobin tax, Robin Hood tax, speculation tax. We like the name the 1% Wall Street sales tax because it's quick and easy to understand. And the question is, how would you distribute the money? And it would have to go, the ideal way would be it would go into the Treasury, and then they would share it 50-50 with the states. And then the states could put it towards education, Medicare, building infrastructure, you know, rebuilding water systems and electricity systems throughout the big cities. You know, you have an estimated revenue, and I know it says 3 trillion and 1% and all that, but if you are taxing the speculation, they're going to curb it. They're not going to do as much. It's like if you tax somebody at a gambling table, they're not going to gamble as much. So this is our solution. It's a national one. It gained a lot of traction in the fall and the winter. There are several European governments that are pushing for this in the European Union so that they can solve their revenue problems. It's been done in the past, so it's something to be interested in, something to listen for. Most of all, though, SUSJ, I think we agree that you're going to have to become involved. It's not something that we're going to be able to solve ourselves. You're going to have to come to Austin with Alan, and you're going to have to vote, and you're going to have to do the things that we should have been doing all along. But I have hope because people seem to rally when there are crises like this. And I think history is full of, it's full of a lot of bad stuff, but there's also a lot of moments in history where you can look back and say there was a crisis and the people rallied and they were able to solve it. So I have hope. If you come with us, I'll have more hope. But I want to thank you all for coming. So I guess that's the end of my talk.
I would like to open the discussion to solutions to the ideas, to the issues we discussed, followed by questions from the audience. So does anyone have any comments?
I have a few comments on some of the stuff Josh said. He spoke briefly on bankruptcy laws, or maybe he did, but for instance, the bankruptcy laws in the United States, they exempt or they do not permit bankruptcy in two circumstances only. The majority of people who take out bankruptcy are individuals, but also corporations do that, banks, etc. Banks got bailed out to a number of $300 billion or what have you. I don't know the exact number.
7 trillion.
Okay, 7 trillion, my bad. I'm sorry. But the two groups of people that can't, or the two situations where you can't declare bankruptcy are in student loan debt and your mortgage. Those are the two biggest bills that any individual has to worry about in their life, that they can't go bankrupt for that, or they can't claim bankruptcy for that. The second thing I wanted to mention was he talked about profit and nonprofit schools. Well, the issue of student loan debt in the public sector is a very crucial and important issue, but in the for-profit sector, it's even larger. the numbers are even more staggering. And the students that are going to these schools are the students that couldn't afford to come to these public institutions because of the higher cost of public school. And now they're forced to take out even higher loans at these other schools. And even the downside to that is the job demand for these graduates are even less than our demand. The only thing else I wanted to talk about was these student loans that he's talking about, the federal direct program right now. The government loans money to us, but also they loan to the banks. Now, the big thing is here, they're loaning to the banks at a 0% rate. At the same time that they're loaning to the banks at a 0% rate, these banks are loaning to us at an 18% rate. Now, she mentioned, do we have any solutions? Well, obviously, we need to go back to a system of grants and less loans. We need to develop our children at an early age. If they don't have the income, we need to provide these social programs to develop the support that they need to succeed later on in life, since they're disadvantaged at the economic level. And also, we need a labor movement again, because we want a new deal again in this country. We want a good deal for the entire society. We need a labor movement. We need unions to protect the workers' rights. Sure, the corporations and the employers provide benefits, they provide all these things, but that disillusions the workforce into believing that their job is secure, their wages might increase, they have this promise of social mobility, but over the last 30 years, that is not the case. So we get unions, we get our wages are up, our entire society goes up, education goes up, and that's all I have.
I just want to say something about pre-K, because in our lawsuit, I think our lawsuit's the only lawsuit that makes a pre-K claim, and it's that, you know, the funding for pre-K is inadequate. And that's especially going to affect English language learner and low-income students, because the pre-K funding is already inadequate all across the board. And so you have fairly poor quality pre-K programs in the state. Now, there's been cuts to pre-K in the state. You have rising standards for these kids. What do you think is going to end up happening to these kids? And, you know, what we've talked about, you know, is the continuum in the system, you know, starting out in pre-K and moving on up. Well, if you don't get many kids off to that fresh start, you're going to end up, the research shows that it's going to be a heck of a lot harder, a heck of a lot costlier to try and bring them up. And it's just really a recipe for disaster.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Just a reflection, Jim Bennington, which you mentioned about the millennial generation. You know, those of you that were born in the 80s, how much longer are you going to take this? You know, is it going to take another 30 years? Or we're going to get things done in the next 5 years, or the next 6 years? That's